The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her 5-year-old daughter Emma's bright red coat. The little girl bounced excitedly beside her mother, clutching a small bouquet of daisies she had picked from their hotel garden earlier that morning. Sarah's husband David walked alongside them, camera ready to capture their first visit to see the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Emma had been fascinated by royal guards ever since seeing them in a picture book at home in Manchester. She had spent weeks practicing her own version of standing perfectly still, much to her parents' amusement. Now, seeing the towering figures in their iconic red tunics and black bearskin hats, her eyes grew wide with wonder. The family positioned themselves among the growing crowd of tourists, all eager to witness the centuries-old tradition. Emma pressed against the metal barriers, straining to get a better view of the guards who stood motionless at their posts. Their expressions were hidden beneath the shadow of their ceremonial hats, faces set in stone as they maintained their legendary discipline. Guard James Peterson had been stationed at this particular post for 3 years. At 28 years old, he had mastered the art of remaining completely still, despite countless distractions. He had endured tourists taking selfies inches from his face, endured the heat of summer and the bitter cold of winter, and had never once broken character. The rigid training had taught him to see straight ahead, to ignore everything in his peripheral vision, and to treat his duty with the utmost seriousness. But today felt different somehow. Perhaps it was the crisp autumn air or the gentle way the morning light filtered through the castle walls. As James stood at attention, he became aware of a small presence near his post. Through his trained peripheral vision, he could see a little girl with curly brown hair, no taller than his ceremonial sword, standing perfectly straight and mimicking his posture. Emma had separated herself slightly from her parents, drawn by an irresistible urge to stand like the guard she admired. She planted her small feet firmly on the ground, pulled her shoulders back, and lifted her chin high. Her chubby hands pressed against her sides as she attempted to mirror the guard's rigid stance. The daisies were carefully clutched in her left hand, their white petals a stark contrast against her red coat. Other tourists began to notice the charming scene. Cameras started clicking as visitors captured the adorable sight of the tiny girl standing guard beside the towering soldier. Sarah and David exchanged amused glances, torn between calling Emma back and allowing her this moment of innocent admiration. Minutes passed in this silent standoff of stillness. Emma's face was scrunched in concentration as she fought the urge to move or look around. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air, and her little legs began to tremble with the effort of remaining stationary. Still, she persisted, determined to prove she could be as disciplined as her hero. James found himself impressed by the child's dedication. In his years of service, he had seen countless people attempt to distract or provoke the guards, but never had he encountered someone trying so earnestly to emulate them. The little girl's determination reminded him of his own first days of training, when every muscle ached from holding position and every instinct screamed to move. As the minutes stretched on, James noticed the child beginning to waver. Her small frame was clearly struggling with the physical demands of standing at attention. Her breathing had become more labored, and he could see her fighting against the natural impulses of childhood. The sight stirred something unexpected in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with his heavy ceremonial uniform. The crowd around them had grown larger, with more people stopping to witness this unusual display of devotion. Some tourists whispered appreciatively about the little girl's commitment, while others watched with growing concern as they noticed her obvious struggle. Sarah stepped forward slightly, ready to intervene if necessary. But something in her daughter's determined expression held her back. Emma's world had narrowed to a single point of focus. She was no longer aware of the cameras, the whispers, or even her parents' presence. There was only the guard beside her and her desperate desire to match his unwavering discipline. Her legs shook more violently now, and she could feel her resolve beginning to crack under the physical strain. It was then that something extraordinary happened. Without moving his head or changing his forward gaze, James Peterson made a decision that would change everything. In the smallest possible movement, invisible to most observers but clearly felt by the little girl beside him, he shifted his weight ever so slightly closer to Emma. It was the tiniest gesture of acknowledgement, a microscopic break in protocol that somehow conveyed volumes. Emma felt the shift immediately. Though she couldn't see the guard's face or catch his eye, she sensed his awareness of her presence. The knowledge that this impressive figure had noticed her effort filled her with renewed strength. Her trembling legs steadied, and she managed to hold her position for several more precious minutes. The morning continued around them, but in that small space beside the castle wall, something magical was unfolding. The barrier between the professional soldier and the devoted child was beginning to dissolve, one tiny gesture at a time. Neither could have predicted that this moment would mark the beginning of an extraordinary friendship that would touch the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. The following Tuesday brought another visit from the Mitchell family. Sarah hadn't planned to return so soon, but Emma had spent the entire week drawing pictures of guards and practicing her standing pose in their living room. When her daughter begged to see her friend again, Sarah couldn't refuse. David had to work, so mother and daughter made the journey alone, Emma chattering excitedly about seeing the tall soldier man who had noticed her. James Peterson was assigned to the same post, a coincidence that would prove more meaningful than anyone could have imagined. As the family approached, he recognized the small figure in the red coat immediately. His training had taught him to remain observant while maintaining his stoic demeanor, and he found himself genuinely curious about whether the determined little girl would return. Emma spotted him from across the courtyard and tugged urgently on her mother's hand. She practically dragged Sarah through the gathering crowd until they reached the familiar spot near the barrier. Without hesitation, Emma assumed her position beside the guard, once again attempting to mirror his perfect posture. This time, however, she came prepared. Hidden in her small backpack was a thermos of hot chocolate and a sandwich her mother had packed, along with a hand-drawn picture she had created specifically for the guard. The drawing showed two stick figures standing side by side, one very tall and one very small, both wearing what appeared to be military hats. As Emma took her place beside him, James noticed she seemed more confident today. Her stance was slightly improved, and she appeared less physically strained by the effort. The child had clearly been practicing, and he found himself oddly proud of her dedication. The thought surprised him, as he had never expected to feel any emotional connection to the tourists who visited the castle daily. 20 minutes into their silent partnership, something unprecedented occurred. A sudden gust of autumn wind swept through the courtyard, strong enough to knock several tourists off balance. Emma, caught off guard by the powerful breeze, stumbled sideways and began to fall toward the stone pavement. In that instant, James Peterson broke 3 centuries of protocol. Without thinking, he stepped forward and caught the falling child in his arms, steadying her before she could hit the ground. The movement was swift and instinctive, the action of a protector rather than a ceremonial figure. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Emma saw not the face of an untouchable statue, but the kind eyes of a young man who had genuinely cared about her safety. The crowd gasped audibly. Cameras flashed frantically as tourists captured this extraordinary breach of the famous Royal Guard stoicism. Sarah rushed forward, her heart pounding with a mixture of gratitude and concern for both her daughter and the guard who had risked his position to help her. James quickly helped Emma regain her footing and attempted to return to his post. But the damage was already done. His commanding officer, Sergeant Williams, had witnessed the entire incident from across the courtyard and was already making his way through the crowd with a stern expression. Emma, completely unaware of the significance of what had just occurred, looked up at James with bright, grateful eyes. In her childish innocence, she reached into her backpack and pulled out the drawing she had made for him. Before anyone could stop her, she pressed the crumpled paper into his gloved hand. The piece of paper felt impossibly light in James's grip, yet somehow carried enormous weight. He looked down at the simple stick figure drawing, created with the pure intention of a child's gratitude, and felt something shift inside his chest. The rigid walls of professional detachment began to crumble as he realized this little girl had somehow managed to see past his uniform to the person underneath. Sergeant Williams reached them just as Emma was explaining to her mother that the nice guard man had saved her from falling. The sergeant's face was a mask of controlled displeasure, though James could detect a flicker of something else in his superior's eyes as he took in the scene. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward, her voice clear and grateful as she addressed the sergeant. She explained how the guard had prevented her daughter from serious injury, emphasizing that his actions had been purely protective and completely justified. Other tourists began to voice their agreement, many having witnessed the incident and impressed by the guard's quick thinking and compassion. The sergeant listened to the testimonies with growing interest. In his 15 years of service, he had rarely seen such genuine public support for a guard's actions. The tourists weren't complaining about broken protocol. They were praising the soldier's humanity and dedication to protecting others. As the crowd began to disperse, Emma refused to leave without properly thanking her protector. She stood on her tiptoes and, in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, declared that James was the best guard in the whole world, and that she would practice standing even better for next time. James found himself fighting back an unexpected smile as he returned to his position. The little girl's words echoed in his mind, and he realized that for the first time in his career, he felt truly proud of his service, not because of the tradition or ceremony, but because of the genuine human connection he had made. Sergeant Williams remained after the family departed, studying his subordinate with new eyes. The incident would need to be reported, but as he watched James return to his duties with renewed purpose and dignity, the sergeant found himself reconsidering what it truly meant to serve with honor. The drawing remained carefully folded in James's pocket, a small reminder that sometimes the most important duty a person can perform is simply being human when humanity is needed most. As the day continued, he found himself standing not just as a symbol of tradition, but as a guardian in the truest sense of the word. Word of the touching encounter between Emma and James spread through the castle staff like wildfire. By the end of that week, nearly everyone from the kitchen staff to the senior officers had heard about the little girl who had tried to stand guard and the soldier who had broken protocol to protect her. The story took on different details with each telling, but the heart of it remained the same. A moment of genuine human connection had occurred within the Stoic walls of tradition. Captain Margaret Thornfield, the commanding officer overseeing the guard units, requested a meeting with both Sergeant Williams and James. As a 20-year veteran who had worked her way up through the ranks, she was known for her strict adherence to protocol and her unwavering commitment to maintaining the dignity of the Royal Guard tradition. James entered her office expecting disciplinary action, possibly even dismissal from his position. Instead, he found Captain Thornfield reviewing a stack of letters and emails that had arrived at the castle over the past 3 days. Tourists who had witnessed the incident had taken the time to write praising James's actions and expressing their admiration for the guard's dedication, not just to ceremony, but to protecting others. Local news outlets had picked up the story, and social media was buzzing with positive comments about the caring guard who had shown that tradition and compassion could coexist. Captain Thornfield looked up from the correspondence as James stood at attention before her desk. Her expression was unreadable, a skill perfected through years of military service. She gestured to the letters scattered across her workspace and asked James to explain, in his own words, exactly what had happened during the incident. James recounted the events with military precision, but as he described Emma's determination and her obvious distress when she began to fall, his voice softened slightly. He explained that his actions had been purely instinctive, driven by a duty to protect that went beyond ceremonial obligations. He made no excuses for breaking protocol and stood ready to accept whatever consequences his actions had earned. The captain listened in silence, occasionally glancing at one of the many positive letters from visitors. When James finished his account, she stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard where the incident had occurred. For several long minutes she said nothing, allowing the weight of the situation to settle between them. Finally, she turned back to face him. Captain Thornfield explained that while protocol existed for important reasons, the primary duty of any soldier was to protect and serve. She had spent considerable time reviewing the incident and consulting with her superiors, and the conclusion was unanimous. James had acted with honor and had actually enhanced the reputation of the guard, rather than diminished it. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Captain Thornfield revealed that the Mitchell family had requested permission to visit again. Emma, apparently, had been asking her parents daily when she could return to see her guard friend and show him how much her standing practice had improved. The family had written a formal letter expressing their gratitude and asking if there was any way their daughter could properly thank James for his kindness. This presented an unusual situation. The royal guard rarely engaged in personal interactions with visitors, but the unique circumstances and the overwhelmingly positive public response had created an opportunity to demonstrate that the guards were not just ceremonial figures, but real people dedicated to service and protection. After much consideration, Captain Thornfield proposed something that had never been done before. She suggested organizing a special ceremony where Emma could officially present James with a token of appreciation. The event would be carefully orchestrated to maintain the dignity of the guard tradition while acknowledging the human moment that had captured so many hearts. The proposal required approval from multiple levels of command, but the positive publicity surrounding the incident had reached the attention of senior palace officials. The story had become a symbol of the modern monarchy's connection to ordinary citizens, and there was genuine enthusiasm for celebrating this unexpected bridge between tradition and humanity. James was asked if he would be comfortable participating in such a ceremony. The question caught him off guard, as he had never been consulted about his personal feelings regarding his duties. As he considered the request, he thought about Emma's determined face as she stood beside him, trying so hard to emulate what she saw as his strength and dedication. He realized that the little girl had taught him something important about his role. She hadn't just seen a uniform or a symbol when she looked at him. She had seen a person worth admiring and emulating. Her innocent perspective had reminded him that being a royal guard wasn't just about following orders or maintaining appearances. It was about embodying the values of service, protection, and honor that the position represented. James accepted the invitation to participate in the ceremony, understanding that it would mark a new chapter not just in his own career, but potentially in the relationship between the royal guards and the public they served. The decision felt right, not because it would bring him recognition, but because it honored the genuine connection that had formed between him and a 5-year-old girl who had seen past the ceremony to the heart of what his service truly meant. Captain Thornfield smiled for the first time during their meeting, an expression that transformed her stern features into something surprisingly warm. She explained that the ceremony would take place the following month, giving the palace staff time to plan an event that would be both meaningful and appropriate. James would have the honor of representing not just himself, but all the guards who served with quiet dedication day after day. As James left the captain's office, he felt a profound sense of purpose that went beyond anything he had experienced during his years of traditional duty. Emma Mitchell had unwittingly started something that would change the way the royal guards connected with the people they served, one small act of courage and kindness at a time. The weeks leading up to the special ceremony transformed the atmosphere around Windsor Castle in ways no one had anticipated. News of the upcoming event had spread through social media and local news outlets, generating an unexpected wave of interest in the human stories behind the famous royal guards. Families began planning visits, specifically to witness what many were calling a historic moment of connection between tradition and modern compassion. Emma Mitchell had become something of a local celebrity in Manchester. Her school friends were amazed that she was going to meet a real royal guard again, and her teachers used her story as an example of how determination and kindness could lead to wonderful opportunities. Emma herself remained delightfully unaware of the broader significance of the situation, focused primarily on perfecting her guard stance and preparing a proper thank you speech for James. At the castle, James found his routine duties taking on new meaning. Fellow guards who had initially teased him about going soft began sharing their own stories of memorable encounters with visitors. Sergeant Williams revealed that he had once helped a lost tourist find her way back to the main entrance, while another guard admitted to discreetly returning a dropped wallet to a family with young children. These conversations revealed something important about the guards, experience that had rarely been acknowledged. Beneath their stoic exteriors, they were deeply aware of and affected by the people around them. They noticed the excited children, the elderly visitors who stood for long periods hoping to catch a glimpse of the ceremony, and the families who traveled great distances to witness British tradition firsthand. Captain Thornfield had been working closely with palace event coordinators to design a ceremony that would honor both Emma's gesture and the dignity of the guard tradition. The event would take place in one of the castle's smaller courtyards, with limited attendance to maintain an intimate atmosphere, while still allowing media coverage of this unprecedented moment. As the ceremony date approached, James found himself experiencing a mixture of nervousness and anticipation he had never felt during his military service. He had faced challenging training exercises, ceremonial inspections, and even security threats with calm professionalism, but the prospect of publicly acknowledging his connection with Emma felt far more personal and vulnerable. The night before the ceremony, James received an unexpected visit from his father, retired Sergeant Major Robert Peterson. The elder Peterson had served in the same regiment 30 years earlier and had always been proud of his son's dedication to maintaining the traditional standards of the Royal Guard. James worried that his father might disapprove of the upcoming ceremony and the attention it had brought to his service. Instead, his father surprised him with a story from his own time as a guard. He described a rainy afternoon when a small boy had approached his post, soaking wet and clearly lost. The official protocol was to ignore civilian distractions, but Sergeant Major Peterson had quietly signaled to a nearby police officer, who helped reunite the child with his frantic parents. He had never reported the incident or spoken about it, but he had always considered it one of the most important moments of his service. The conversation helped James understand that the connection between guards and the public wasn't new. It had simply been unacknowledged. Generation after generation of guards had found ways to serve and protect while maintaining their ceremonial duties. The upcoming ceremony wasn't breaking with tradition. It was celebrating the human heart of that tradition. On the morning of the ceremony, Emma woke up early and insisted on wearing her best dress, a blue frock with small white flowers that her grandmother had given her for special occasions. She had practiced her thank you speech dozens of times and had prepared a new drawing for James, this one showing him catching her as she fell, with a big yellow sun smiling down on both of them. The Mitchell family arrived at the castle to find themselves greeted by palace staff with unprecedented warmth and attention. Emma was introduced to several other guards who would participate in the ceremony, each maintaining their professional demeanor while showing subtle signs of genuine friendliness that wouldn't have been visible to casual observers. As the ceremony began, a small crowd of invited guests gathered in the courtyard. Local media representatives were present, along with several families who had witnessed the original incident and had written letters of support. The atmosphere was respectful, but charged with excitement as everyone prepared to witness something truly unique in Royal Guard history. Captain Thornfield served as the ceremony's host, explaining the significance of the event and the values it represented. She spoke about the balance between tradition and humanity, emphasizing that the Royal Guards had always been people first and symbols second. The ceremony would celebrate not just Emma's determination and James's compassion, but the broader truth that service and kindness could coexist with dignity and professionalism. When Emma was invited to step forward and present her gift to James, she walked with careful precision across the courtyard, her small hand clutching the new drawing she had created. The crowd fell silent as she approached the guard who had shown her such unexpected kindness weeks earlier. James knelt down to Emma's level, a gesture that brought them eye to eye for the first time since their initial encounter. In that moment, all the ceremony and protocol faded away, leaving just a young man and a little girl who had found an unexpected friendship in the most unlikely circumstances. Emma handed him the drawing and delivered her carefully rehearsed thank you speech, her young voice carrying clearly across the quiet courtyard. She thanked him not just for catching her when she fell, but for noticing her when she tried to stand like him, and for showing her that being strong and kind could happen at the same time. As James accepted the gift, he realized that this moment represented something far more significant than a single act of kindness. It was the beginning of a new understanding about what it meant to serve, not just as a guard or a soldier, but as a human being committed to protecting and caring for others in whatever way circumstances demanded. The ceremony's most powerful moment came when James stood to address the small gathering. He had been given permission to speak briefly about his experience, something no Royal Guard had ever done in such a public setting. As he faced the crowd, still holding Emma's drawing, his words carried the weight of centuries of silent service finally given voice. James spoke simply but eloquently about what Emma had taught him through her determination and innocent admiration. He explained that her attempt to stand guard beside him had reminded him why he had chosen this path of service in the first place. It wasn't about the pageantry or the tradition, though those things mattered. It was about being someone worthy of the trust and respect that people like Emma placed in the uniform he wore. He described how her presence had made him more aware of all the visitors who came to the castle carrying their own stories of hope, curiosity, and wonder. Each person in the crowds represented someone's child, parent, or grandparent, all deserving of the protection and respect that his position symbolized. Emma had simply made that abstract concept personal and immediate. As James spoke, several of the other guards in attendance found themselves reflecting on their own experiences with memorable visitors. Guard Thompson remembered an elderly veteran who had saluted him during a ceremony, tears streaming down the old man's face as he honored the young soldiers continuing the tradition he had once served. Guard Martinez recalled a group of schoolchildren who had waved at him from behind the barriers, their teacher explaining how the guards represented the values of duty and service they were learning about in class. Captain Thornfield watched the proceedings with deep satisfaction. The ceremony was accomplishing exactly what she had hoped it would, demonstrating that the Royal Guards could maintain their dignity and tradition while also acknowledging their fundamental humanity. The positive response from both the media and the public confirmed that people wanted to see their protectors as real individuals, not just ceremonial figures. Emma listened to James's speech with rapt attention, though she didn't fully understand all the grown-up words he was using. What she did understand was that he was talking about her, and that somehow her simple desire to stand like him had meant something important to other people too. The knowledge made her feel proud in a way she had never experienced before. Proud not just of herself, but of being part of something bigger and more meaningful. Following James's speech, Captain Thornfield announced a surprising development. The positive response to Emma and James's story had inspired the palace to create a new program called Guardians of Honor, designed to foster appropriate connections between the Royal Guards and the communities they served. The program would include educational visits to local schools, participation in community events, and opportunities for guards to share their experiences and values with the public. The announcement represented a fundamental shift in how the Royal Guards would interact with society. While maintaining their ceremonial duties and traditional disciplines, they would also embrace their role as ambassadors of service, honor, and protection. Emma's innocent act of admiration had sparked a revolution in thinking about the relationship between ancient traditions and modern community engagement. As the formal ceremony concluded, Emma was given a special tour of areas of the castle normally closed to visitors. James, still in his ceremonial uniform but now wearing a genuine smile, served as her personal guide. She peppered him with questions about his daily routine, his training, and whether he ever got tired of standing so still for so long. Their conversation revealed the natural curiosity and wisdom that had drawn them together in the first place. Emma asked why being a guard was important, and James found himself explaining concepts of duty, service, and protection in terms simple enough for a 5-year-old to understand. In doing so, he clarified these concepts for himself in ways his formal training had never achieved. The tour included a visit to the guards' preparation area, where Emma met several other soldiers who shared stories about their own reasons for choosing this unique form of service. Each guard had joined for different reasons, some following family traditions, others drawn by the history and pageantry, still others motivated by a desire to serve their country in a visible and meaningful way. Emma's presence in this traditionally closed space created an atmosphere of openness and reflection that many of the guards had never experienced. Her innocent questions prompted them to articulate thoughts and feelings about their service that they had rarely discussed even among themselves. The little girl who had started by trying to imitate their stance had ended up helping them understand their own motivations more clearly. As the day drew to a close, the Mitchell family prepared to return home to Manchester. Emma had filled a small notebook with sketches of different guards she had met, along with their names and something special about each one. Guard Thompson, who had served for 12 years, was noted for his very shiny boots. Guard Martinez was remembered for his nice smile when he thought no one was looking. The notebook became a treasure that Emma would keep for years, a reminder of the day when her simple act of admiration had grown into something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. More importantly, it represented the beginning of a new understanding about the power of genuine human connection to transform even the most traditional institutions. James walked the family to the castle gates, a privilege that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. As they said their goodbyes, Emma promised to keep practicing her guard stance and to visit again soon. James assured her that she would always be welcome, and that he would be honored to stand guard beside her anytime she wanted to try. 6 months after the ceremony, the Guardians of Honor program had exceeded everyone's expectations. James Peterson found himself regularly visiting schools throughout the region, not as a silent ceremonial figure, but as an educator and role model who could speak personally about the values of service, discipline, and community protection. His natural ability to connect with children, first demonstrated through his relationship with Emma, had made him one of the program's most requested speakers. During these school visits, James would arrive in his full-dress uniform, immediately capturing the attention of students who had only seen royal guards as distant figures in photographs or on television. He would begin each presentation by asking if anyone knew what a royal guard's most important job really was. The answers varied from protecting the Queen to looking fancy, but James would always guide the discussion toward the deeper truth. Their primary duty was to serve and protect all the people, not just royalty. Emma Mitchell had become something of a celebrity at her own school, where her friendship with James had inspired other children to think about careers in service and protection. She had started a junior guards club where students practiced standing at attention, learned about the history of the Royal Guards, and discussed ways they could serve their own community. The club had grown from 5 original members to over 30 children, all motivated by Emma's example of courage and determination. The ripple effects of their initial encounter continued to spread in unexpected ways. Other military units began adopting similar community engagement programs, recognizing that public support and understanding were enhanced when people could connect with the individuals behind the uniforms. Police departments, firefighters, and other service organizations reported increased interest from young people who had been inspired by the story of the little girl in the guard who had shown that strength and kindness could coexist. Captain Thornfield had been promoted to colonel, largely in recognition of her innovative leadership in developing the community engagement program. She often reflected on how a single moment of human connection had sparked institutional changes that were now being studied and replicated by military organizations around the world. The story of Emma and James had become a case study in how tradition could evolve without losing its essential character. James's own perspective on his service had been permanently transformed. While he maintained the same high standards of discipline and professionalism that had always defined the Royal Guards, he now understood his role in much broader terms. Every visitor who watched the changing of the guard ceremony, every child who pointed excitedly at his uniform, every elderly person who saluted as he passed, was someone whose day he might brighten through a subtle gesture of acknowledgement or kindness. The drawing Emma had given him during that first encounter remained carefully preserved in his quarters, a reminder of the moment when his life had taken this unexpected turn. He had received hundreds of letters and drawings from children around the world who had heard their story, each one reinforcing his understanding that his service extended far beyond the castle walls to touch lives in ways he might never fully know. Emma continued to visit the castle regularly with her family. Though these visits had taken on a different character, she no longer felt the need to prove herself by standing perfectly still beside the guards. Instead, she moved confidently through spaces that had once seemed impossibly formal, greeting guards by name and sharing stories about her own activities and interests. Her relationship with James had evolved into something resembling that of a favorite uncle and niece, built on mutual respect and genuine affection. She would update him on her progress in school, her latest drawings, and her plans for the future, which now included the possibility of serving in the military herself someday. James encouraged her ambitions while reminding her that service took many forms. And the most important thing was to find a way to help others that matched her own interests and talents. The broader impact of their story became clear during a special anniversary ceremony held exactly 1 year after Emma's first visit. Hundreds of families who had been inspired by the Guardians of Honor program gathered at the castle to celebrate the transformation in how military service was understood and appreciated by the public. Children who had never shown interest in history or civics had become engaged citizens, motivated by the example of service they had witnessed. During the anniversary ceremony, Emma was invited to speak about her experience and what she had learned from her friendship with James. Standing confidently before the large audience, she spoke with the wisdom of a child who had discovered that heroes aren't distant figures but real people who choose to do difficult things to help others. She explained that James had taught her that being brave didn't mean never being scared. It meant doing the right thing even when it was hard. She had learned that real strength came not from standing perfectly still, but from being willing to move when someone needed help. Most importantly, she had discovered that the most impressive thing about the Royal Guards wasn't their fancy uniforms or perfect posture, but their commitment to protecting and serving everyone around them. As Emma concluded her speech, James stepped forward to join her at the podium. Together they represented the bridge between tradition and progress, between ceremony and humanity, that had transformed not just their own lives, but the institution they both cherished. Their friendship had proven that the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest gestures of connection and understanding. The story of Emma Mitchell and James Peterson became more than just a heartwarming tale of an unlikely friendship. It became a testament to the power of seeing past surface appearances, to recognize the shared humanity that connects us all. Their encounter had started with a little girl's simple desire to stand like a soldier, but it had grown into a movement that changed how an entire institution related to the people it served. In the years that followed, their story would continue to inspire others to look for opportunities to bridge divides, to find common ground across different backgrounds and positions, and to remember that the most important traditions are those that honor both the dignity of service and the warmth of human connection.